I'm not in the mood.
Mood?
Mood's a thing for cattle and love play, not fighting.
The slow blade
Penetrates the shield.
But look down, my lord. You'd have joined me in death.
It seemed finally to get the mood.
Welcome once again to another critical movie review. And this time, it's a good one. Dune Part 1 and 2, with a comparison to the 1984 David Lynch Dune. For the record, I am a Dune fan. I have read the books, and it was my favorite book for a period of time. With that, I can see the attention to detail that Denis Villeneuve put in the movie. When I saw the glow globes roll into the screen, I was already geeking out. And to be fair, you can see the attention to detail in the David Lynch's Dune as well. So I'll also be reviewing the movie from a book fan's perspective as well. So let's get into it. And let's start with the cast. It is an almost perfect cast, with the standouts being Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Timothy Chalamet, and Rebecca Ferguson. Being that the story revolves around Paul Atreides, Timothy Chalamet does have a boyish look while still holding himself up with charisma of a leader. Rebecca Ferguson we already knew was a good-looking badass from the Mission Impossible films. But what really sells her character are the moments of vulnerability and duality she struggles amongst herself for the love she has for Leto or the loyalty of the sisterhood. Now I did say it was almost perfect. Some of the more minor characters were decent picks, but not ideal in my opinion. The two glaring casts were Sharon Duncan Brewster and Zendaya. When it comes to Zendaya, I don't think it's a bad casting, but this is the real world, and Zendaya comes with baggage. She isn't a Tilda Swinton character actor that is completely different in each role. She is Zendaya playing Chani. That's what I see, and that's what it is. She kind of plays every character the same way. The bitchy girl with the chip on her shoulder. We'll discuss further when we get into the writing. Sharon Duncan Brewster is for obvious reasons that she's a gender and race swapped character. Does that affect the story? In the book, it does, but in the movie, those facts are omitted. From the movie's perspective, there's no reason why she couldn't be the Imperial planetologist. Nevertheless, nobody can't deny that she was a DEI hire. With that said, was she any good? To her credit, she was fine, and as she is a Brit, her non-Brit accent was excellent. Obviously, they could have just kept it like the book and cast a guy. But if this was to bump up the ESG scores, it's a small price to pay, and I can overlook it. Last but not least, let me also address Dr. Yui. Casting Chang-Che was interesting. For the record, he is a solid actor, but we all know the sole reason he was cast was to gain access to the Chinese market. Again, it's not accurate, but I understand, and I can overlook that as well. So even though these castings aren't perfect, they are really just small quibbles looking at the big picture. Looking at the cast of David Lynch's Dune, it also had an excellent cast. I didn't have an issue with Kyle MacLachlan aging up Paul. Although all of the Harkonnens overacted and chewed the scenery doing strange and disturbing acts, you couldn't help but watch even though you questioned what you were watching. A pre-Jean-Luc Picard Patrick Stewart as Gurney Halleck was interesting, but he's too polished and clean. He should have looked more grizzled. He would have been a better choice to play Duncan Idaho based off of his appearance alone. Now let's talk about the story. The book has a natural break where 5 years elapse. Villeneuve's Dune is completely continuous, starting Part 2 immediately where Part 1 ends. Being that Jessica is pregnant and she still hasn't given birth at the end of Part 2, we can roughly gauge that everything happens from the beginning of Part 2 to the end was no more than 5 or 6 months, 7 tops. In the David Lynch version, there is the elapse of time with a narration from Princess Irulan filling us in and Paul's sister Aaliyah is born. Taking in the first half, both movies are very accurate. Paul is tested with the box. The Atreides are given control of Arrakis while knowing it's most likely a trap. Paul is looked upon as the Lisan al-Gaib. They meet Dr. Kynes and survey the spice harvesting. They encounter the spice harvester unable to lift off from the carryall and make an emergency landing to save the harvester crew. Paul encounters a hunter-seeker in his room. Leto is betrayed by Dr. Yui, and the Harkonnens march in with a surprise attack. Paul and Jessica are bound and flown to be dropped in the deep desert, but they manage to commandeer the ship and escape. Leto blows the poison gas at the Baron, killing Piter DeVries instead. In the desert, Paul has a prescient and awakened dream. Paul and Jessica make their way in the deep desert and meet up with Stilgar. Paul meets Chani and realizes she's the girl from his dreams. And that's pretty much where part 1 ends. In the Alan Smithy extended version, it really shows how accurate David Lynch was in filming all of these additional scenes that were left on the cutting room floor due to the runtime. There's too many additional scenes to go over, but the point that David Lynch actually filmed these scenes proves just how committed he was in being faithful to the book.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
At this point, the David Lynch movie is over halfway done, with less than an hour to wrap up the rest of the book, whereas Villeneuve's Dune has all of 2 hours 35 minutes of part 2 remaining. Being that both versions are accurate in hitting the major plot points, Villeneuve's Dune had an extra hour worth of screen time. So what was expanded? We got the Imperial Herald announcing the change in ownership of Arrakis. We got more character development of Duncan Idaho. We saw Paul's prescient dreams were not the future, but a possible future. We saw the palm trees of Dune and their significance. We saw the ecological station on Arrakis and how Dr. Kynes aids Paul and Jessica's escape. We got a more detailed interpretation of the Harkonnen raid of Arrakis. And finally, we got the duel of Paul and Jameis. I don't find any of these as filler. It's all from the book, and I loved every second. But the movie's pacing is important, and if some people felt the movie dragged at times, I could understand. Again, geeking out at the glow globes from the beginning of the movie, I was surprised to see that they showed the Sandwalk, the Silence Speak, and yes, I was totally geeking out when they showed Muad'Dib, the desert rat, and how it gathered water. Now, from the book's perspective, the question we would ask is, was there anything left out? When it comes to the main story, the answer is no, for both movies. The only thing would have been to show the motivation of why Dr. Yueh would betray the Duke. Even though it's stated, we don't feel how Dr. Yueh felt that was worthy to become a traitor. Villeneuve's Dune keeps this as a surprise for the audience, whereas the Lynch version shows you beforehand and implies a reason before the reveal. At this moment, let me state that I liked Dune Part 1 more than Part 2. I have always liked the first half of the book more than the second, and part of the reason why is because Lady Jessica was my favorite character. The second half is pretty much all Paul, which is accurate and not a complaint. Now, let's move to Part 2. Sticking to what both movies do, Jessica drinks the water of life, Paul reunites with Gurney Halleck, the Fremen heavily disrupt spice production, Paul learns to ride a worm, Paul drinks the water of life, Paul attacks Arrakeen with atomics, Paul tells Shaddam IV to claim him as the new emperor of the known universe, Paul duels Fade Routha.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
These are the main plot points to end the story. In the Lynch version, it is very rushed, and in the Villeneuve version, I think he spends too much time on building this up and too little time on the resolution, giving it the appearance of it being a total cakewalk for the Fremen. The one thing the book does that doesn't appear in either movie versions is show the price of war. In the book, Paul and Chani have a son. During the final battle, the siege where his son was is attacked, and Paul hears about it through radio communication. He says, my son is dead." So even though they are victorious in the end, Paul still pays a personal price in the battle. Although I understand why both movies didn't want to get caught up with Paul having a child, as it really is only character development for Paul rather than story progression, it is one of the more memorable moments in the second half of the book. So what did the Villeneuve version do and show us? They took their time and focused heavily on Paul and Chani's relationship. Granted, it was instantaneous in the Lynch version, but I still felt it was overdone. We got to see Fade Routha's gladiatorial duel on Giedi Prime. We saw Lady Fenring and her attachment to the Sisterhood. We saw the Fremen religion a bit more in depth. We saw Fade Routha in relief of Raban and spice production. We got Paul doing all that he could do to not drink the water of life. And finally, we got the bitchy girlfriend leaving his beloved Paul because he makes a political decision to marry Irulan in order to become emperor. Coming into the movie, I was expecting the entire last hour to be the final battle. Instead, it was more like 20 minutes. Although there were some epic moments, the resolution felt way too easy. Even the fight between Raban and Gurney was weak. Being that this fight isn't source material, I understand why they chose to show it, but because it was so quick and short, I have to question why did he even add it in the first place? The other issue was the Paul and Chani relationship. It simply dwelled on them for too much screen time. The best parts of the movie were the times they went back to Gidi Prime. This is the political intrigue that we want to know about. The little infighting the Harkonnens have amongst themselves, always having to look over their shoulders from being assassinated by their own kin, is the more interesting part. Really fast, let me bring up the cast again. As much as I like The Walk, he's just not right to be the Emperor. Jose Ferrer was a better choice in comparison. He's old, but much more robust for the role. Doing a quick comparison of the cast, other than Jose Ferrer, I also think Jurgen Prochnow was a better choice than Oscar Isaacs. I'm not saying Oscar Isaacs isn't good, but that Prochnow looks like a better Duke. And of course, Max von Sydow was a better choice than Sharon Duncan Brewster, but that goes without saying. Now, the choice of telling the story without the 5-year time jump. The two biggest issues are Paul becoming Fremen and Aaliyah not being born. When it comes to Aaliyah, after Jessica drinks the water of life, Aaliyah is immediately awakened with her eyes opened. Jessica talking to Aaliyah still in the womb works for me, and I have no problems with this alteration. It does change the ending of the source material a bit, but I can overlook those changes. When it comes to Paul becoming Fremen, this is where they could have used a montage. Of course, it's important to show it, but at the same time, the minutiae isn't the most interesting stuff to show. Using it in relation to developing Paul and Chani's relationship is convenient, but kind of boring. I would have liked the time spent on Gidi Prime, and when they returned back to Arrakis, time had elapsed and he was ready to ride the worm. Now, let's move to the ending. In the Lynch version, it rains. Of course, David Lynch said he didn't have final cut, so we have no idea how he intended it to end. In the Villeneuve version, we get Chani all pissed off at Paul leaving to ride a worm. Neither of these endings are source material, but I really don't like the Villeneuve ending. In the book, Chani is extremely compliant to Paul's wishes. She knows her place in perspective to Paul's in the known universe. He's the Duke of House Atreides, the Lisan al-Gaib. That means something, and she understood that. And with all of the politicking that happened at the end, she tells Paul whatever he had to do, she would understand. Then Paul reassures her directly, calling her by her secret name, Sihaya. Even though he would be wedded to Irulan, he would never touch her or share the same relationship that they already have. In the movie, Paul does say something along these lines, but she still bolts like a sulking bitch. As much as I dislike this ending, they did set up a bunch of plot lines for Dune Messiah. Just to give a small spoiler, there is a 15-year time gap between Dune and Dune Messiah. It has been said that Villeneuve's Dune Messiah will have a 10-year time gap between movies. So in regards to Chani running off like a sulking bitch, the ending is pointless. The resolution of it is that after 10 years have passed, she just finally accepts the decision. If Villeneuve says she accepts it out of reluctance, then it'll be a marked deviation from Chani in the books. That's something that doesn't sound good. So let's address Zendaya. Chani is barely in part 1, and for the most part, she's just in Paul's prescient dreams. When they meet her in person, she does come off as standoffish, which is accurate, but she never says,
Tell me of your homeworld, Lusa.
In part 2, Zendaya is simply just playing herself, the girl with the constant chip on her shoulder. The best example of this is when they're attacking the Harvester and Paul and Chani are trying to take out the Ornithopter. Paul tells her about the shields, and what is her reply?
I know that. What do you think I'm trying to do?
If she knew, then why did she shoot when the gunner's looking right at her? It's these little woke moments that ruins the characters and the scenes. Now, is she a better cast than Sean Young? I would say yes, and it's not her fault the character is written with these woke nuances. It seems like Zendaya is typecasted as the woman with the chip on her shoulder. So part 2 let me down a bit. I would have liked to have seen a longer final battle, one that didn't look so much like a Fremen cakewalk into the palace, a better duel between Raban and Gurney, and a Chani that was much more in line with the source material. So why this change in Chani? From being a loyal girlfriend understanding the big picture in the politics of the known universe, to being a pouty and inconsiderate one even after being assured from Paul himself. If you haven't read the book, can I see people understanding Chani's perspective? Yes, I can. On the other hand, we've all seen Part 1, and making a bid for the throne was mentioned, so this choice didn't just appear out of nowhere.
You'd make a play for the throne.
Maybe the choice Paul made wasn't a Fremen thing to do, and yet he made the same choice in the source material, and Chani went along with it. Then there's the things that Denis Villeneuve said. According to Frank Herbert, Paul is not supposed to be looked upon as a savior, but rather a warning to us in falsely putting our faith into these type of figures. Because of this, Denis Villeneuve supposedly took this into account and changed the ending to represent this more prominently. It is true that Frank Herbert did express this, but he did rectify it in the other books. Changing Chani's attitude in the end doesn't do anything for me in this regard, and no amount of justification, even if the reasons were true, is going to change my mind to make me believe this alteration was for the better. Now, let's do some side-by-side comparisons of the two movies. First, the voice. Simply put, the voice is a trained technique of the Bene Gesserit of power of command. If you've seen Star Wars, this is where the Jedi mind trick comes from.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
Both movies portrayed on screen as distorted audio. In the Villeneuve Dune, they have the scene where Jessica tells Paul to use the voice on her. It's an interesting scene conveying the effects the voice has on a person. When Paul uses the voice commanding for the glass of water, they show Jessica compelled to give him the glass of water, but because the modulation of the voice was not correct, plus her training, it did not work. Obviously, this isn't in the book, but it is a good scene to explain this bit of world building. Both movies show the Reverend Mother use the voice on Paul. It's interesting the way it's shown in the Villeneuve version, when under the influence of the voice, it's like a gap in time where you have no recollection of. Then there's a scene where Paul and Jessica are both captured by the Harkonnens. In the Lynch version, the dialogue is almost exactly as if it was written from the source material, whereas the Villeneuve version is shown as direct commands.
There's no need to fight him from me.
In the Lynch version and the book, the things Jessica say aren't commands, but more along the lines of suggestive thoughts, and the voice emphasizes those thoughts where the target cannot disregard and is compelled to act upon them. The Villeneuve version is simply direct commands. Obviously, these are creative choices made here, and I'll just leave it at that. Which one do you prefer? For me, I prefer the Lynch version, which is book accurate. How about the weirding modules? This was completely unique to the Lynch version of Dune. However, I do appreciate the creativity. The Bene Gesserit martial art fighting style was known as the Weirding Way. Instead of creating a strange hand-to-hand combat style, they came up with weapons that enhance your voice to be powerful audio waves. The Villeneuve version doesn't have these obviously, but at the same time, there isn't any unique display of the Bene Gesserit Weirding Way either. The representation of it is probably this from Paul's prescient dream. And if this is the display of the Weirding Way, it doesn't look unique enough to call it a style of fighting. Now, of course, I can't forget the ornithopters. If I'm geeking out over the glow globes, how do you think I feel about the ornithopters? The dragonfly design is really cool, and of course, it being completely analog because of the Butlerian Jihad is accurate. Unfortunately, I have to knock the Lynch version on this one. The ornithopter is just a flying box, and of course, the special effects are extremely dated. The other thing I was interested in seeing was the personal shields. Given what we saw from Lynch's Dune, which as dated as it looks now, took an immense amount of time and effort to rotoscope in, still looked dated then. Although it didn't look great, I still thought it was interesting and I'm glad they showed it off. Now, fast forward to the world of CGI, it simply is better. A distorted field along with visual cues of blue and red showing us field penetration. They gave us a simple visual example before Paul and Gurney's training. It's visually clean and direct, allowing us to see the action, and overall, it's well done. Another thing worth mentioning is the space travel. Villeneuve's version omits this, and although it is in the book, it isn't necessary to show. The Lynch version does show this, and shows us the Guild Navigator plotting their course in folding space. I think Lynch would have omitted this out as well had the timing been different. Being that the movie came out in '84, it was only a year after Return of the Jedi. This being a science fiction movie, he probably felt the need to include it because the audience was expecting it. Once again, the special effects are extremely dated looking, but I give credit to Lynch for showing a guild navigator. Being that there wasn't one in the first book, and it was only in Dune Messiah when a guild navigator was described, I feel that Lynch's Dune gave us a little bonus. Speaking about the guild navigator, let's discuss the openings. Being that Dune requires a lot of exposition to set up the story, both versions have opening narrations. The Lynch version uses Princess Irulan, which makes sense as many of the book's chapters begins with an excerpt from Irulan's historical notes. Villeneuve's Dune uses Chani because I don't know why. The narration is told from a Fremen perspective, and using Chani was simply a creative choice. Both movies' narration sets up roughly where the books begin, but the Lynch Dune gives us a new scene of the Guild Navigator meeting the Emperor with the Navigator telling him that they specifically want Paul Atreides to be killed. And it is because of this meeting that makes the Reverend Mother go to Caladan and test Paul. Villeneuve's Dune gives us the Emperor's Herald, signifying the change in control of Arrakis over to House Atreides. I like the additions of both versions. Anything that is based off of the source material, I'll gladly accept. Of course, we have to compare to Harkonnens. In the Lynch version, they are redheads. In the Villeneuve version, they're bald and white-skinned. Neither of these features were stated in the book. It was said that Giedi Prime was a heavily industrialized world, which the Lynch version does portray it as such. Villeneuve's version has Giedi Prime under a black sun, so they have no melanin in their skin. These are both creative choices, which I have no issue with either of them. When it comes to the portrayal of the characters, the Lynch version shows the Baron as more maniacal than calculating. Lynch does show off how depraved and deviant the Baron is, which is accurate, but more subtle in the books. The new version gives us a more sly and calculating Baron. There is the one scene where the Baron kills his servants off-screen while Raban waits to have a meeting with him. This is probably the closest we got to seeing his depraved side. Being that the times have changed, showing the evil antagonist of the story as deviant and depraved was totally fine back in the 80s. Fast forward to the present, where the left are trying to normalize pedos by referring themselves as minor attracted people. Showing the Baron as a deviant, gay, and pedophilic wouldn't sit well with them, so I understand why those attributes were omitted. As for Raban, I don't think he had a single line of dialogue in the Lynch version, but he served his purpose based off of the book. Dave Bautista was fine in the new version. Now, Sting or Austin Butler as Fade Routha. If we went with the book, Austin Butler is a more accurate choice, not to say Sting was a bad choice. Given the way the Harkonnens were portrayed in Lynch's Dune, Sting fit right in. The one thing the Villeneuve version did that the Lynch version didn't do was the in-family threats to usurp the throne. It's these political machinations that are interesting to see. What the Lynch version does the Villeneuve version doesn't is to show just how pervertedly evil the Harkonnens are. When Thufir Hawat is captured, they tell him he has to milk a cat every day for the antidote to the poison they gave him, or else he'll die. I don't think that was source material, so it shows the bizarre creativity Lynch put into this movie.
What the hell?
And this leads me to the comparison of the ending. Forget the rain scene in the Lynch version. Let's look at everything before that. Everything the Lynch version shows is pretty accurate to the book. The way Raban dies is accurate. The way the Baron dies is relatively accurate. The duel between Paul and Fade is spot on accurate. The hidden blade on Fade's hip, Paul bending like a reed in the wind, and stabbing Fade under his jaw into his head is just like the book. Villeneuve's version, I'm convinced he must be a Zen minimalist. Looking at all of his sci-fi movies, Blade Runner, The Arrival, and even Sicario, there's lots of empty space with only a single thing for the audience to focus on. The duel is good, not overly flashy or edited. The changes are made for dramatic effect, which I do like. Which duel do I prefer? That's a hard one. The fight was better in the Villeneuve version, but if it could have had the finishing moves like the Lynch version, it would have been perfect. So I'll give it a tie. And that'll do it for this video. To David Lynch's credit, Frank Herbert said Lynch's movie was good. To be praised by the author is definitely noteworthy, and given the limitations of special effects and the runtime, you can't say David Lynch didn't try or stray away very far from the source material. So in the end, we got a Lynchian Dune, which isn't a bad thing at all. Of course, I am very happy to have gotten not just a remake of Dune, but the one from Denis Villeneuve, who's passionate about the source material and has a talent to undertake this huge project and has the clout in Hollywood to attract an all-star cast and be entrusted with a big budget. I am looking forward to Dune Messiah when it eventually does come out. No, I haven't seen any of HBO Max's Dune Prophecy. It looks like woke garbage, and I believe it is. And in the meantime, I would like to give a couple of shout outs to two other content creators. If you're interested in Dune lore from the source material, please check out Quinn's Ideas. Not only is he a big Dune fan, his knowledge of Dune lore is extensive. Also, if you're interested in updates to Dune Messiah and Dune Prophecy, please check out Nerd Cookies. She is extremely up to date with all the new news going on with the status of these projects. And as usual, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back here next time. Until then.